Hi, I'm Marcy Degman, the Aspiring Gardener, and we're here today to talk about plans for perennial gardens in the sun. And the first thing I want to talk about is the types of plants that you want to put in full sun. If that's the type of exposure you have, you want to first think about plants that don't need a lot of water, that can tolerate the sun without wilting. One set of plants that does really well are the succulents. Now here I have basic hen and chicks. But there's so many different succulents today. There's ground cover succulents, there's shrub succulents, yucca, aloe, agave. Depending on your climate, you should be able to grow some of those. If you're in a hot climate, you can probably grow all of them. But they're really good. They have very few roots and they need very little water. So that right there takes the maintenance away. The other kinds of plants that you might want to consider putting in a hot sun perennial garden are herbs. Oregano, thyme, rosemary, lavender, all of those are very good for hot weather. In fact, they suffer from too much water. What I have here is a partial hot and partial shade garden. And what I want to talk about is what happens over time in a perennial garden. You start out with a blank slate like this, and you've got full sun exposure, and you put in a lot of sun plants. And what happens is other plants will grow up, like this crepe myrtle, which will eventually probably be about 8 feet tall. And over here I have a madrone tree, which is going to be pretty tall, but they open up and they're pretty airy, so it's not going to be dense shade, but it will bring in some shade. So what you have to think about when you plant a garden is if you're putting any kind of shrubbery, small trees, even low bushes, think about the 5-year growth. This one is probably just about that old, and so is this crepe myrtle. So you can see how already they're starting to cover a little bit. So if you've got really hot sun plants, make sure that you bring those out in the forefront. There are a lot of plants that can handle both. So what you want to do is you want to plant things that can handle the full sun exposure, but that aren't going to die out later when the shade comes in. Here I have a hardy fuchsia, which is not a plant that likes really hot sun. But it gets the morning sun, and then it gets just enough shade from this madrone in the afternoon to survive. So most gardens, unless it's just flowers, will be a mixed garden of hot areas and at least partial sun areas. So when you're planting your perennial garden, because these plants are going to come back year after year, you have to think of all those things when you're putting them in. Here I have my structure in place, but I have a good sun area here where I can add all kinds of flowers. I can add grasses, succulents, herbs, anything that I want, because this right here is going to be nice and sunny. So just remember, when you're doing a perennial garden in the sun, think about the long-term changes as other plants grow up, and those are tips that will help you with a hot sun perennial garden.